Okay guys, this is going to be a video on rebuilding a Borg Warner K03 turbo, very similar to the K04. I'm going to call this a stock plus rebuild. There's a few videos I've seen on the internet of just a standard rebuild, so there's all that information there. This is all stock components on this rebuild with the exception of the rebuild kit. Okay, so basically the parts on the top, all these right here, these are the stock journal bearing, the stock thrust bearing, which has a very tiny oil port. The oil port in the single feed journal bearing is actually quite small too. The upgraded parts from Turbo Lab America, they actually have a very large hole, and they actually, on the top of the bearing, there's multiple ports to oil the turbo shaft, and to help with coking, things like that. The journal bearing, the thrust bearing is also a triple port. It has feeds along the side of the bearing and also the inlet on the bottom. The reason why I'm saying this is a plus, stock rebuild plus, would be because of the port work that I did to the center housing itself. The oil port that goes to the thrust bearing, the inside of it, right in here, it's a cast piece, so there's a lot of casting flash. Not only is there a lot of casting flash inside of there, there's some sharp edges that, in my opinion, would impede oil flow and be places where the oil would clog up, a place for it to build up, especially considering how hot the center section gets. Then I also did a bit of polishing and porting on the oil feed inlets and exits. I just polished the entry, then I made sure to gasket match the opening, not by much, just a little bit. I mean, the stock size is pretty good. Then the fittings, this would be the fitting to the oil feed. This would be like your oil feed coming in. This fitting unscrews. I made sure and cleaned up all the flash on the inside in the center housing itself, and then the fitting I went ahead and mirror polished just the surface, the passageway on the inside itself. This other port would be the water inlet. I know most people, unless it's a stock turbo, they don't have a water-cooled turbo, which the coking effect, which would be the oil turning to sludge and blocking passages and things like that, in my opinion, the water-cooled turbo is really the only way to go. Now, I'm sure people will say that their oil-only cooled turbo lasts 1,000,000 hours and they never have any issues, but when you send oil through, this center housing, which is attached to the exhaust on the turbo itself, and that's glowing red hot, oil and glowing red hot iron are not going to work well together. They're not going to play well together. So when you have, basically the passages of this center housing, they have water, and the water surrounds the oil passages, so it helps to cool the center section, the main center section, which in turn keeps the oil cool, but the water also keeps the journal bearing, the shaft, the seals. It keeps everything generally cooler. So back to what I did there. Like a radiator. I don't know if you've ever torn an engine apart, especially a high mileage engine, that the cooling system hasn't really been maintained well. The inside of all the cooling ports, they'll have a scale that's either from not running distilled water, the minerals in the water when they get hot will coat the inside of the passages, and that's just not something you want running through your cooling system, especially through your water pump. You know, that scale will turn into like a stalactite material, basically just a mineral film, and you don't want that running through your cooling system. So at any rate, I went through the oil passages, the cooling passages. I polished the inside of this fitting where the water comes in. Then I took a Dremel with some kind of fine porting bits and cleaned up the cast and did my best to polish the inside of the cooling chamber inside the turbo itself. So this center housing is not going to have any mineral buildup. It won't have any oil buildup either. The oil is going to have a lot less. It's going to have a lot less of a ability to stick, because oil is going to stick, you know, regardless of if water cooled or not. It's going to want to stick to the cast surface, but oil is going to want to stick less to, you know, a surface that is a mirror. It's going to stick less to that than to a surface that is like tree bark, which is what most cast material, it's like the outside of this turbo cast. Oil is going to want to stick to that a lot easier. So that's just a good tidbit of information. You know, if things are polished, now I wouldn't say polish everything, but if things are polished, especially oil passages, things like that, you know, it's going to help to increase the flow rate, and also it's going to keep things from sticking, especially when you're talking about going through a hot center section. So that's basically the modifications I did to the center section. This could be done to any turbo, even I'm sure even your eBay turbos. That's a kind of another discussion in itself, the eBay turbos. But you know, you could probably do this if there's enough material and you're not risking anything. Kind of clean up the ports, see if you can get inside some of the oil passages and get them all cleaned up, so you know it flows better and there's a lot less chance of coking. You know, coking comes from running the car really hard and just shutting it off, even letting it idle, you know, just for a few minutes after a hard run when everything's, you know, glowing red. Letting it idle for a few minutes will definitely help with the coking. Having a water cooled center section is absolutely going to help, but I would still let the car idle after a hard run or use a turbo timer to keep the coking from happening. Another quick thing about the eBay turbos, and I've read a lot about this, I've seen some videos about it also. They're actually, I mean, metal is, as long as the metallurgy of the components is good, the problem is going to come from especially from the turbines, you know, when you have a turbine, this is very, very small. This is a very small turbo. Like I said, it's a K03, stock K03 compressor wheel, and then this is the exhaust turbine. This center section here was designed by Borg-Warner to support the weight, the size of these rotating assemblies, or these rotating pieces. And the eBay turbos that I've seen, especially the M12, I think it's a 60 trim, the center section is not much larger than this center section, but the turbines are, you know, 3 times the size. So the journal bearing is just not going to support, nor the shaft support, that much weight. And these turbos will last a very, very long time. They are small. They're not capable of huge horsepower, but they work really well on the cars that they come on, and they'd be a great addition to other engines. I'm actually going to put this one on my 97 Honda Civic, which would be a single overhead cam engine, 1.6 liter, and I think it'll work great. Actually, I saw a guy that put one on a Honda 1.6 liter, and it worked really, really well. He had some really good numbers. I think he was somewhere around 250 horsepower, wheel horsepower, which is really good, and that's really all I'm looking for. Anything more than that, I have another car that's more of a high horsepower build. Onto the issues with these turbos. The only real issue that I've seen, other than they're not real big, would be the exhaust housing. This is actually a aftermarket, well, not aftermarket. This is a new exhaust housing that I picked up. This is from Borg-Warner. It's a Borg-Warner exhaust housing. The exhaust housing has a tendency to crack right here on, this is kind of like it's a wall. It's to protect the wastegate, flapper, you know, from all the high heat, but they seem to crack right here. The one that I had on this turbo was cracked. They seem to crack right here, and then where the dump would be, inside the dump, you probably can't see that very well, but inside the dump, they crack there also. A bunch of stuff I read, guys were saying, you know, they've ran them crack, building boost forever. Now, I guess as long as the crack doesn't go through to the outside, of course, that would definitely jeopardize the integrity of the metal, but they all seem to be cracked on the inside, so I went ahead and got this one so I could do this build with a fresh, non-cracked exhaust housing. And the car that this came off of that was cracked, I think it had 60,000 miles. The cracks weren't terrible. They weren't all the way through, but they were pretty good. They were close to being through. You know, after cycling a couple times red hot, or a couple hundred times, they probably would have cracked all the way through. So that's the new exhaust housing. Moving on to the compressor housing. This would be the compressor housing here. You can see it's a stock Borg-Warner K03 compressor housing. I think it's a K03058. They might have a little bit different on the lettering or whatever, but all of the inlet and outlet sizes are the same. What I did to this was, you can probably see the inlet is pretty Pretty mirror polished. That's not going to make any great gains. It's not going to change anything. But I just did it just because I could have had all the porting material, all the buffing wheels and things like that. So I went ahead and mirror polished the inside. Now the part that isn't quite as pretty mirror polished, but probably makes a pretty substantial difference, would be the inside. So the inside, this is, you know, where your outlet on the compressor is, and this is where you could definitely make some gains on most turbos, especially this one. The ones that I've seen, a lot of the ones, they're very comparable as far as the cast. You know, they're cast aluminum. Some of them have, the cast is cleaned up. Some of them have big chunks of cast, or the casting is just extremely rough. This is where you would want the cast to be smooth, or you would want the surface to be extremely smooth. Now I'm not talking about here, this of course where the matting surface, and here's the matting surface. I'm talking about where the outlet is. I don't know if you can get a lot of light in there, but it's pretty well polished. It was very rough, and most are going to be really rough. Turbulent air coming out of here isn't going to do anything for you. It's definitely going to rob you of horsepower. The smoother it is, the easier air can move out of it. It's like your intake manifold. You know, your intake manifold, you want to be extremely smooth also. Your intake ports on your head, you know, you want those to be smooth, but that's a different effect whenever you start talking about combustion chambers, making those mirror polished. That's something else for a different video. But as far as air moving out of here, it's going to have no trouble. There was large pieces of cast kind of blocking, and the cast was rough coming out of the turbo. Inside here, it might be a little hard to see, but inside here where the air is going to come, you know, around through here and out, down through here, there was actually a couple really sharp edges, and I smoothed out these sharp edges inside here. There was actually a big chunk of casting flash right here that I smoothed out inside this port. I went ahead and took that all the way out, and then down through here there was some really hard casting flash, kind of where it made the transition, I guess, from the machining. The machining, where the machining is done, is actually extremely smooth, but the casting flash is going to make the air more turbulent. So yeah, I polished that, and I went ahead and polished the inside right here, removed all the casting flash all through here, and smoothed this out. I didn't mirror polish the inside of this, I just made it extremely smooth. And I usually just do that with buffing wheels, flapper wheels, and some like felt ball polishers with some Mother's compound. Especially on aluminum, will take it down really, really quick. I mean, it'll take it down quick on steel too, but it'll take it down on aluminum extremely fast. So then also, this would be, this is the cover for the compressor. This is not polished. This is actually going to be RTV, black RTV. I actually learned that from Ian at Turbo Labs America. He really knows what he's talking about when it comes to rebuilding turbos. God knows how many thousands he's probably done. He sandblasted, or he sandblasts anything he's going to put RTV on. He sandblasts the surface, a shiny surface. Things aren't going to stick to like RTV, especially like a sealant. From the factory, it's almost where this cover connects. It's almost, and then it goes right down through here. It's like a glue I would say almost like a high temp epoxy. It's right in here, and then there's some on the inside. It's like an epoxy. Seals really well. It probably lasts a long time. He recommends, the gentleman at Turbo Labs America recommends using black RTV, and based on the thousands and thousands of turbos he's built, I'll say that that's probably the way to go. This is the stock wastegate. It's just cleaned up really well. The car had a little bit of an oil leak that it came out of. I believe it was more of a, it wasn't an oil leak associated with the turbo. The turbo seals weren't necessarily leaking. It was just an oil leak on the valve cover that had kind of made a mess. So I cleaned this up really well before I get ready to put it back together. So moving on to the rebuild. This rebuild kit, the upgraded rebuild kit, is from Turbo Labs America. I believe it was right at $50 for this kit, and it comes with everything you need. Like I said, the journal bearing is extremely high polished, and more importantly, the feed holes are large, and there's more of them. The inside of the journal bearing, the journal bearing is where I've seen some coking with these turbos, or just other turbos. They get a lot of gunk built up inside. Then of course a lot of the oil sludge seems to build up on the drain, inside the drain for these. So this polished surface is really, really nice. It'll work well. Oil will just flow right through it. Same with the thrust bearing. It's super high quality, and I definitely recommend, if he has the rebuild kit for your turbo in stock, definitely get it from him. Definitely watch his videos also. It's Ian at Turbo Lab America. He knows what he's talking about, without a doubt. Okay, so moving on with the rebuild. The first thing you want to do is to put the bearing retaining clip in, which would be this clip. It's really the only actual, what I would call a C-clip. Comes in from the back side. The holes in it are really small, so I have like 20 different tips for these snap ring pliers, and none of them were small enough. But yeah, the little clip, it just goes in. Okay, so after you get the snap ring down in there, that's the very first thing to go. Snap rings seated down in there. Then we go ahead and drop the thrust washer, the journal bearing in. Put a little bit of oil on the journal bearing, because it doesn't rotate. Once it's in there, it has a collar, a locking collar, so it never moves once it's in there. Drop that down in there. So that's down in there. And then after that, we put the locker. This will lock the journal bearing into place. It's gotta be facing the right way. Alright, we got that in place. And then right after that goes this spring clip. There's a little groove. Just kind of mash it in there. See that? There's a little groove right inside that edge that it kind of snaps in. And it just popped into place. Okay, so I've got the little open-ended clip in on the journal bearing, the retainer spring. And then this is the clip that holds that. In this particular kit, the next thing that comes is this little thrust bearing washer. The bevel on one side is bigger than the bevel on the other, so the bigger beveled end goes down, and then next comes your thrust washer, your thrust bearing rather. I put a little bit of oil on the bottom. The feed ports, they go down. And then to line that up, this is the retainer that locks the thrust bearing in place. So then that's the basic assembly for the center housing. And that holds that in place. So I'm going to set that to the side and then go ahead and start to finish the assembly. The shaft, which would be the exhaust turbine, there's a small clip that snaps it into place in the housing. So this clip goes on right there into the top groove. A little bit of oil, of course. And I'm getting all this from watching the gentleman at Turbo Labs America. His info on rebuilding these turbos is really, really good. And that goes all the way down to the bottom. And so that's on there. And then this small piece here, there's a clip. This clip, which is the smallest clip. It's like a snap ring, but it doesn't really snap. It's an open-ended ring, like a retaining clip. It goes right around here and goes into the cover. So there's a little groove inside here, and you just kind of push it in, you'll hear it snap. And I put some oil on here also. Boom. Now that's snapped in, spins freely. I'm gonna set that to the side. Now we can go ahead and put the shaft in. So go back here. And right here in this edge, there's an O-ring, a seal. And that seal goes right around there. Just falls into place for when you mat everything up. So holding that in place, on the bottom, put in your heat shield. And then your turbine can go in. Okay, so the thrust bearing retainer goes in. You just go ahead and feed the shaft after you put the clip on. Feed it through, kind of give it a little wiggle, pushing it in, it'll pop right in. So then you're left with this portion here. Now you can go ahead and you can mat this up first to your center section, or you can put your housing, connect your housing first. But I'm going to go ahead and mate up these two. I put a little bit of oil, if you can see right in here. Put a little bit of oil underneath that seal. This goes right on top of the shaft. Pops into place. You can, there's my shaft kind of popped out. You just give it a little wiggle. Get it to snap back in. There, that's all snapped back in. And you can kind of hold the heat shield and test it for freedom of movement. As you can see, spins really nice and free. I will say also, real quick, that the turbine impeller, whenever I disassembled it, these are balanced, I believe, to the 1,000th of a gram. Might be the 100th of the gram. I think it's 1,000th of the gram that these shafts are balanced, but there was a ton of buildup, just from exhaust buildup on this, and I cleaned it up really well. I soaked it in vinegar to kind of get most of it off. Then I just kind of, being very delicate, wire brushed it all off. So my theory is if it's balanced that precise, then there's probably, I would guesstimate that I took between each fin, I probably took off, I don't know, a little less than 1/4 gram between each fin, so that would definitely throw off the balance. It hadn't touched inside of the housing or anything, but that'll just give you an idea. So the next step would be putting on the compressor wheel. You can see the compressor wheel is really, really clean. It almost looks billet. It's not, it's just the stock compressor wheel. I just cleaned it really, really well. It's aluminum, so I gave it kind of a quick soak in a vinegar water mixture to kind of get a bunch of the crud off of it. But yeah, you can see it's really, really clean. You just have to be careful. You don't want to drop this. It is cast aluminum, and they're very stiff, but the fins could bend very easily. So I made a mark on my shaft before I took any of this off. I actually marked the shaft, the wheel, and the nut, because they, you know, the factory balance, all that stuff needs to be in place. So you probably can't see it, but there is a small mark on the shaft. The one on the wheel, if I can focus in a little bit, I can show you. Let's see if you're gonna be able to see it. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see the one on the wheel. Yeah, there's a little mark. I can see it. It's basically the alignment mark that I made before I disassembled anything. So I have a mark on the shaft where I disassembled it. I have a mark on the wheel. So I'm going to go ahead and put the wheel on. Line it up with the mark that I had on the shaft. That snaps into place. Get it on camera so you can see it here. That snaps into place. My lines are, they're all lined up. Now I'm going to take my nut. There's a mark also on the nut. You're probably not going to be able to see it, but there's a mark on the nut. It's reverse thread. So righty loosey, lefty tighty on this. Okay, so what I did is I went ahead and put on the compressor wheel and the nut. Like I said, this kit, it does come with a new nut, but my nut is already balanced. I can see where it's been notched in a couple places, it's already balanced. So I lined up my marks on the shaft. I actually made two sets of marks, one on opposite sides, to make sure that I didn't lose alignment on the shaft, nut, and compressor wheel position. So now that that's all together, if you hold the heat shield for the turbine, everything spins really nice and easy. Now what's left is to put on the compressor housing. I cleaned this surface with some acetone that I stole from my girl. She had some 100% acetone. Stole that, cleaned that surface off. Then I also cleaned off the inside of this surface right here. And I'm going to apply some black RTV, some black silicone sealant per Ian at TurboLab America. His instructions, he recommends using this stuff. And while I'm putting that on there, I was gonna, you know, there's other videos of this being done. I think there's 3 or 4 videos of just this exact turbo, a K03 turbo rebuild. I just wanted to show what I did to the ports, cleaning out all the ports and the cavities. You know, cleaning out, like I said, the oil ports and the coolant ports. Just because I've noticed on YouTube especially, a lot of the instructional videos, now I'm not saying any of the ones that I saw for this turbo, but other instructional videos and other channels where there are things done, say like brake upgrades, turbo installs, motor installs, engine builds. I noticed that a lot of the info essentially ignores basic, you know, generalized engine building or basic mechanical technique. I don't know if I was just lucky and, you know, my dad knew a lot about engines. He's a welder, fabricator, and I learned a lot of stuff from him, of course, but a lot of the info that I see, I shouldn't say info, a lot of the videos that I see giving instruction on how to, just like I said, how to do certain things, it's fun. There's fundamental there's just fundamental like mistruths, like I said. There's things that like you would never do on any engine build ever. I've noticed a couple engine builds, you know, because I'm like anybody else, I watch a lot of these videos, engine build videos, and upgrade videos, turbo videos, just things like that. And the things that I see, you know, I don't know if it's a lot of there has to be people that have the knowledge watching these videos, and they just don't, they never comment, they don't say anything, you know. I mean, even if you're just messing around, you're not putting a bunch of money into the engine build, things like making sure that the engine is clean, extremely clean, as clean as possible. Engines don't need any help failing. They'll fail all on their own if you do everything right, you know, so they don't need any help. You know, keeping everything clean, you know, putting things back together clean, and not, you know, not having everything dirty or like skipping fundamental engine building steps. And as you can see, I'm putting it on the RTV or silicone seal. I'm putting it on the compressor housing also, where they meet up together, keeping it off of the inside. You don't want any of that going into the engine, and you will have a little bit of squish. But yeah, I see like people running, you know, turbos, not checking. I mean, if you're gonna take the time to put a turbo, even if it's an eBay turbo, on your car, and it has extreme shaft play, you know, it's not gonna last, you know, more than a couple weeks if you're running it hard. So I don't know why a lot of people would even waste their time putting some of this stuff together. And that, like I said, that's why if there's enough information out there, you know, good solid information on, you know, good general mechanic practices, even the most basic stuff, the more that's out there, the better. Like I said, there's enough videos on how to do this particular rebuild, but I wanted to show, you know, the porting that I did and the things to kind of help it along. It's a great little turbo, so anything that I do extra will be good for the longevity. Like I said, there will be a little bit of squishing out when those two surfaces that have the RTV on them meet. So you don't want any of that squish to be overhanging, because that squish will have a little, it'll make a little bead. That little bead will end up coming loose and end up in your intake if it makes it past, well, on this, if it makes it past the intercooler. And another quick thing, while I'm cleaning this RTV off my fingers, I should have used gloves, I got a box of gloves right here, is, I don't know, it's like I see a lot of, I surf a lot, and I see a lot of people surfing without a leash. So you know, it doesn't make any sense to me why you would surf without a leash. Maybe it's like a cool factor or something, I don't know. Maybe it shows that like you're really cool or something. It's the same thing I was gonna say is running a turbo without an air filter. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. I mean, I know you see like big, huge turbos on drag cars that there's no air filter, but I can't tell you why. I mean, maybe they're rebuilding them every race, but I would absolutely, without a doubt, run an air filter. I'm gonna go ahead and mat these two together. Air filter on my car. So they just go right together, nice and easy. I have 2 of these, so for now, just till the RTV dries, one of these brackets should be the wastegate. The wastegate actually holds the compressor to the center housing. It's got a little flange on it right there, you know, and it would go down right there. It would hold that down. But I have two of the brackets because the kit I had came with one. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put it on with 2 brackets because I'm not gonna hook up the wastegate right now. This wastegate, I think it comes stock set for like 8 pounds. Which I'm probably gonna, when I run the car I run this on, I'll probably have it set at, I don't know, around 10 or 15, between 10 and 15 depending on the tuning and stuff. Losing my spot a little bit. But yeah, the point of this, this channel is going to be to do some builds. I have another car that I didn't document anything. I have a couple videos from just kind of startup and when I ran it. It's a big block Chevy in a 1993 Nissan 300ZX. It took a lot of time. If I would have documented some of the things I did on that, I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to see it. But I have a lot of the stuff to build that, and that actually I've blown that engine up twice, or I should say that engine blew up twice, not even from really running it hard, just from mechanical failures. Really nothing that could be avoided. Got those all tightened up. I'm gonna let that seal up really good. But yeah, that engine blew up twice. The first time it ate the camshaft just from the lifters. One of the lifters I think quit spinning, ate the camshaft. And the second time was kind of the same story. Running flat tappet camshaft and a big engine like that, roller is the way to go. If you're not running roller in a big cubic edge engine, I don't know what you're doing. A lot of guys probably won't know what the difference is between a roller in a hydraulic flat tap or a solid lift cam, but roller is the way to go. Reducing friction and handling the big spring rates that those big engines have. Alright, so now here's my exhaust housing. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so you can see this really well. Okay, so I have my compressor housing sealed to the center section. Like I said, I haven't hooked up the wastegate. I had 2 brackets, so I use those 2 brackets. Just for now, let the sealant set up. I'm gonna go ahead and hook up, or mate up rather, the center compressor assembly to the exhaust housing. So it just fits in there nice and easy. Might take a little wiggle to get it in there good. And that's pretty much it. For my particular build, I'm gonna have to build a. This flange here. This is what hooks up to your turbo manifold or turbo header. I'm probably gonna have to use I'm gonna keep my air conditioner in my car. Like I said, it's a Civic. I'm gonna keep the air condition, so I'm probably gonna have to build like a log manifold. I'm gonna build it out of tube, stainless tube, but I might actually build it out of thick wall, mild steel. Stainless has a tendency to crack over time, but this flange is strange. It's not a T3, T4 flange. It's just a German Borg-Warner flange, so I'm gonna mount up a flange basically to a regular log manifold style for space reasons, because there's just not enough room to run the AC with a long tube header type of setup. So essentially these little clips, zoom back in here for you so you can see. So zoom in here. These little clips, they basically just turn, lock onto the center section. You gotta loosen them up just a little bit. These are kind of tight. They lock up the center section. It's a little tight too, but yeah, they all go around and they lock onto the center section, and then torque them down with, if you have basically just a regular 10 millimeter, if you grind this, there is going to be a spot where it's not going to want to tighten, usually right underneath your inlet for your oil and your water, or oil and your coolant. It's like really hard to get under there. This is kind of this wrench, I might be able to get it under there. But if you grind that, just grind a little bit off of it, it makes it a lot easier to get in there and get them all tightened and torqued down. So I'm not gonna lock these down just yet, because I have to figure out the positioning for my car, how it's gonna need to sit, how it's gonna need to be turned, and also you want your oil drain to be straight down. The oil drain on this is right here on the back. You want your oil drain to be straight down, so I kind of have to figure out how I need to turn everything to where the oil drain is straight down, it connects to my manifold, and then how my where my outlet needs to go to the intercooler piping. So that's pretty much it.